Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 872 for May 24th, 2021. Coming up in a few minutes.
Shingo, when Tori-san came here about 4 years ago in 2017 and intimated the desire to see the distillery return to our traditional roots, that gave us a task in Scotland in how we achieved that within the kind of glide path we're trying to achieve from the sustainability journey.
It takes 10-15 minutes for the spirit to start coming in, so we've actually reduced the boil-up time by a good 30-35 minutes. And again, as you say, that's a huge energy saving. Less carbon being burnt by the boiler to give us the energy we need to boil it up.
Beam Suntory's new Proof Positive Sustainability Initiative calls for major investments over the next 2 decades to reduce the environmental impact of its spirits production worldwide. That work means taking historic distilleries and figuring out ways to bring them up to date while maintaining their character, both for the distillery and for its spirit. At Glen Garioch Distillery in Scotland's Highlands, that meant a return to direct-fired stills and the first new floor maltings at a Scotch Whisky distillery in 15 years. Alistair Longwell oversees production at Beam Suntory's distilleries in Scotland, and Kwanele Mdluli is Glen Garioch's distillery manager. They'll join me later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, behind the label, and...
Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversations. I am Leon.
And I am Patty.
The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
Hi, I'm Gabriel from Dewar's Blended Scotch Whisky. I love sharing stories about Dewar's, and our newest innovation, Portuguese Smooth, has a great one. It's the tale of Scotland and Portugal, centuries of tradition meeting in one delicious bottle. Curious? Try it for yourself. You won't be disappointed.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Small batch. How would you describe it? It's like an Irishman's understanding of baseball. Extremely limited.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the news. And we have breaking news again this week on a Monday morning. Great Britain is now starting the process of, quote, rebalancing its tariffs on American whiskies and other consumer goods. Those tariffs were linked to the European Union's 2018 retaliatory tariffs, designed to punish the U.S. for imposing tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. The consultation process with UK stakeholders will last for 6 weeks. International Trade Secretary Liz Truss said this morning that while the U.S. tariffs are still unjustified, the government wants to de-escalate the dispute with the U.S. and make sure any future tariffs are, quote, shaped to UK interests. Distilled Spirits Council CEO Chris Swanger notes that the UK inherited the power to remove the tariffs on its own after leaving the European Union earlier this year.
Discus sent Liz Truss a letter about 10 days ago, basically encouraging her to consider this. If you recall, in November 2019, if I got my days right, Boris Johnson, when he was campaigning for his prime minister seat, did say publicly that he would remove the tariffs on American whiskey as soon as he got into office. So now that the tariffs on single malt Scotch have been suspended till July 11th, we do hope that the UK will take it upon themselves to remove the tariffs on American whiskey. And the UK is our 4th largest market. So that would be another important building block. And we're hoping, with all hope, that could be the next big news that could come. But we don't want to put the cart before the horse. We got to do this step by step.
Just hours after our last podcast dropped, the European Union announced that it would suspend next week's automatic doubling of the current 25% tariff. That came as the EU and the Biden administration agreed to start talks on the global oversupply of steel and aluminum that led to the U.S. tariffs in 2018. The move is being praised throughout the industry as another sign that relations between the U.S. and Europe are improving, and as we reported last week, both sides are also hoping to resolve their long-time dispute over aircraft subsidies soon. That dispute led to the U.S. imposing tariffs on single malt whiskies from Scotland and Northern Ireland, along with other spirits from around Europe. Those tariffs are currently part of a 4-month-long pause for negotiations. The tariffs on both sides of the Atlantic have cost whiskey makers millions of dollars in lost sales over the past 3 years. In other news, there's a milestone in Scotland to talk about. Last Wednesday, they rolled out the first new barrel of spirit from Diageo's Brora Distillery since 1983. Following 3 years of restoration work at the historic distillery. While we will not get to find out what the whiskey tastes like for many, many years, distillery manager Stuart Bowman says they tried to come as close as possible to the original Brora character, even though they are using modern-day strains of barley and yeast.
From a practical point of view, the way that they made whiskey back then with the strengths of the wort that they produced were quite low, and the yeast strains that they used as well, fermented that out. But the yeast that they had was it was recycled brewer's yeast to a large extent. So I think certainly way back in the day. So in order to be responsible in terms of how we produced, we certainly had to increase the gravities a little bit, and also using modern yeast strains to ferment out all the sugars, but then also give us that beautiful, intense underlying fruity character that we're really looking for from Brora. So it was an element to build into the into how we kind of produce things, and it's something that we're continuing to tweak quite a bit to this day.
The restoration was made easier because all of the original equipment was left in place when Brora closed. In fact, the stills were sent out to be refurbished and are back in use today. The distillery is also now open for tours by advance reservation only. Back when Diageo announced the plans for Brora's revival in late 2017, they also announced plans to do the same at Port Ellen Distillery on Isla. However, there is a lot more work involved in that revival, including the construction of an all-new stillhouse. During the Brora briefing Wednesday, I asked Diageo's Ewan Gunn for an update on the work at Port Ellen. The pandemic has played a major role in delaying that work.
It definitely slowed things down. I mean, obviously Isla is an island community, and we have to be respectful of that. So that did mean things are moving at a different pace to how they were able to move here. It is progressing. We are now forecasting completion in 2023. So that program is still moving forward, just at a slightly different pace. So we're looking forward to that as well.
As we reported earlier this month, there will be a change in leadership for the Port Ellen revival. That's because former Lagavulin distillery manager Georgie Crawford will be leaving the company in the coming weeks. She'll be joining Elixir Distillers in July as construction begins on their new distillery just east of Port Ellen. Speaking of Lagavulin, there's been an addition to the Offerman edition range of Lagavulin bottlings curated by actor and longtime Lagavulin lover Nick Offerman. It's an 11-year-old Lagavulin that's been finished in barrels from the Guinness Open Gate Brewery in Baltimore and will be available in limited amounts with a recommended retail price of $79.99 a bottle. Another collaboration of note, this one is between Heaven's Door, the American whiskey brand partially owned by singer and songwriter Bob Dylan, and Redbreast. Heaven's Door master blender Ryan Perry teamed up with Redbreast master blender Billy Layton to create the Heaven's Door Redbreast Master Blenders Edition. It's a 10-year-old bourbon finished in ex-sherry casks that were used for Redbreast 12-year-old. Ryan and Billy joined us on Friday's Happy Hour live webcast, and Ryan admitted that he had to do some courting to make this collaboration happen.
When we created the brand, one of our pillars is collaboration. And I think in learning, I worked at Diageo straight out of college, and there's many brands under the portfolio. And I just gathered a lot of great insight from multiple different parts of our business. And I think for Heaven's Door, we took a bit of that perspective and really wanted to collaborate with other masters of their trade. And, you know, with a strong brand, Billy's legendary status in whiskey, I think it was a great, ultimate collaboration. And we were just thrilled they were willing to work with us. And we had some really nice, good aged bourbon to add to the party.
Billy, what was your thought when Ryan contacted you?
Yeah, well, it was, I suppose that the first thoughts were, try and convince us why we should go through with this collaboration. You know, that was the first thing. Why should Redbreast? Tell us why you think Redbreast should get involved. And the discussion didn't take very long, to be honest, because, well, Redbreast as a brand itself has a great heritage. It has been around since 1912. It kind of succeeded through the hardest of times in Irish whiskey, and has survived and is flourishing today. So that heritage, along, I don't want to do any name dropping here, but along with the Heaven's Door co-founder, certain Mr. Bob Dylan, has a huge, background or influence from Irish connections, particularly in his music.
By the way, Ryan Perry notes that Bob Dylan was even more involved in this blend than usual. Seems he's a longtime Redbreast fan. Unfortunately, this edition is a one-off. It's available in limited amounts in the U.S. now, and will be available in Ireland and the UK this September. The recommended retail price is $99.99 a bottle. I'll have my tasting notes for it later on. Another collaboration bringing together musicians and whiskey makers, Catoctin Creek's partnership with the heavy metal band Gwar hits retailers this week, the Ragnarok Rye. The band's official biography describes them as, quote, intergalactic screw-ups. And during our Happy Hour live webcast earlier this month, Catoctin Creek co-founder Becky Harris described it as an interesting experience.
When they came to the distillery, it was really probably one of the scariest things ever. They began threatening to eat my dog. They kept calling us filthy humans. Scott was pretty intimidated, but they really wanted to create a whiskey that spoke to both their perspective as, galactic invaders and to the ethos that we had here in Virginia. And so it's been really incredible. It was really fun. It was a time from a whiskey standpoint, purely a whiskey standpoint, not the artist collective known as Gwar, but from the perspective of a distiller to look at what can I do with them that is true to the way that we do things as a distillery. Can I use some different tools in my toolbox to make a little different flavor, give it a different spin? And then, of course, the amazingness that is trying to design a label and the packaging that's really going to speak to rock and roll and
get through the TTB.
Yeah, we did have to be a little careful. There were some of the taglines that the band wanted to include that we did not think would be in the Drink Responsibly sort of message, but it has been a lot of fun.
The Ragnarok Rye will be available starting Friday at retailers and the distillery in Purcellville, Virginia, along with Catoctin Creek's online shop for shipping within Virginia. Meanwhile, Texas's Milam and Green Whiskey is releasing the first batch in its new Castle Hill series. It's a batch of 20 barrels of 13-year-old bourbon, blended by Heather Green, and bottled at 54.25% ABV. The whiskey gets its name from the Castle, the old Texas Military Institute on the hill overlooking the state capitol in Austin. It's now home to Milam and Green's Austin offices and Heather Green's blending lab, along with a brand-new private tasting room where she met virtually with whiskey writers this week.
It's becoming an international player in terms of businesses coming down, music events, art events, South by Southwest, Austin City Limits, you have the tech scene. And a lot of people are coming through and really might only have, like a half an hour to come. And so this is a way for them to experience what you guys just did, a really beautiful blending experience in a private tasting room. So we're not allowed to sell out of there. We can only sell out of the distillery per the laws of Texas, but it is a experiential room to come for small groups of guests to book the room, have a cocktail, have a blending session, enjoy some whiskey, and really kind of understand what we're about. So we're super excited about that. It's our private kind of bar.
I'll have my tasting notes for Milam and Green's Castle Hill Series Batch 1 later on. Glenallachie has released a Batch 1 of its own, the 30-year-old Cask Strength Batch 1. It's the oldest release from Glenallachie since Billy Walker and his partners acquired the distillery. The whiskey comes from a combination of casks filled in 1989 and 1990. It'll be available worldwide for £475 a bottle. That's about $675 at current exchange rates. Finally, Glen Farklas is celebrating its 185th anniversary. The Speyside Distillery went legal back in May of 1836, and some of its warehouses are even older than that. The 185th anniversary edition is blended from casks going back 6 decades to the 1950s. Just 6,000 bottles will be available in the UK, with a recommended retail price of £120 each. That's around $170. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. If you missed Friday night's Happy Hour live webcast with Heaven's Door Master Blender Ryan Perry, Middleton Master Blender Billy Layton, and Andrew Lang of Hunter Lang & Company, the on-demand replay is available right now at the WhiskyCast YouTube channel. Listen to the rest of the podcast first, though. There will not be an in-person Isla festival on the island starting this coming weekend, but we will have our own virtual version this Friday night when Ardbeg Distillery manager Colin Gordon joins us on the webcast. We'll get started at 5 p.m. New York time, 10 p.m. Isla time, and 2100 GMT on the WhiskyCast YouTube channel, our Facebook page, Twitter, and Twitch. Time now for the calendar of events brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. Ardbeg's 2-bus Monsters of Smoke bus tour continues this week. One bus will be stopping in South Florida, the other in the Kansas City area. Glen Scotia Distillery will hold a virtual version of the Campbellton Malts Festival online this Wednesday through Friday. The Whiskey Exchange hosts a virtual Watt whiskey tasting online this Wednesday. And the Our Whiskey Virtual Festival wraps up with Wonka Vision on Thursday. Whiskey Live Canberra is this Friday and Saturday in Australia's capital city, and Whiskey Live Sydney is coming up next weekend. Bonhams has its next whiskey auction June 1st in Edinburgh, Scotland, and tickets are still on sale for the National Whiskey Festival in Edinburgh, June 5th. Westport Whiskey and Wine in Louisville, Kentucky is bringing back in-person tastings, and will start off June 3rd with a barrel craft spirits tasting. The Virginia Craft Spirits Roadshow kicks off its 2021 schedule on June 12th in Richmond, Virginia, and Louisville's KFC Yum Center will host a sip and savor dinner and tasting with Rabbit Hole Distilling June 17th. Right now, we have 178 live and virtual events on our searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states, 3 continents, and online. Visit the Where to Buy page at catoctincreekdistilling.com to find a retailer near you. And please drink responsibly.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
You know, dads aren't the best at dropping hints, so I'll do it on their behalf. Get him Redbreast, the world's most awarded single pot still Irish whiskey. Hint, hint.
Happy Father's Day from Redbreast, proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Oban and the Classic Malts lineup. Sustainability has become a critical issue for many industries, and whiskey is certainly no exception. After all, distillers depend on the environment for everything that goes into making the whiskeys we enjoy, and the future of the whiskey industry depends on being able to reduce the environmental impact of making whiskey while not changing its character or quality. To that end, a lot of whiskey makers have been investing in all sorts of projects designed to improve sustainability. That includes Beam Suntory's Proof Positive project, which has the ambitious goals of becoming greenhouse gas neutral by 2040, reducing water usage by 50%, and using 100% recyclable packaging by 2030 across all of its facilities worldwide. The thing is, many of those facilities are older. In the case of Glen Garioch Distillery in Scotland, much older. The original distillery was built back in 1797, and while it has been upgraded many times since then, if time travel allowed for one of the original Glen Garioch distillers to spring forward 224 years, they would not feel that much out of place. The distillery is in the middle of an $8.5 million upgrade project that combines a revival of traditional practices like floor maltings and direct-fired stills with modern technology that adds sustainability to tradition. Alistair Longwell heads up distillery operations for Beam Suntory in Scotland, and Kwanele Mdluli has been Glen Garioch's distillery manager since 2019. I spent some time with them on Zoom the other day. Let's talk first of all about what you are doing at Glen Garioch, because doing things like going back to direct-fired stills and things like that seem traditional and seem like something a distillery wouldn't be doing. But explain how you're doing this in a way that actually reduces a carbon footprint.
Well, Suntory have a strong desire to produce the best possible quality of Scotch, and the Suntory family have always had a strong desire to see Glen Garioch flourish. You know, she's got a special place in the Suntory family, and she's a very old distillery. She's been operating in the heart of this community since 1797. And she was coal-fired until, or not coal-fired, sorry, gas-fired until fairly recently. She was in, the 1990s. So, yes, it's a return to roots, but it's a return to a position where the distillery was fairly recently. The trick we've had is how we do it, as you say, sustainably. Shingo, when Tori-san came here about 4 years ago in 2017, and intimated his desire to see the distillery return to our traditional roots. That gave us a task in Scotland on how we achieve that within the kind of glide path we're trying to achieve from the sustainability journey. So we haven't just put back what was there 20, 30 years ago. We've looked at the kind of cutting edge technology to try and optimise how we implement traditional methods, but with a view to the future. So we're confident we're going to hit our projections. Kwanele and the team have been hit an initial target this year of a 15% energy reduction after the introduction of direct firing, which they're getting very close to, and in fact have beaten that on a couple of occasions in the last month. So we probably could go a bit further. And it sets ourselves up for the future because it's direct gas firing, and we're already using the lowest carbon kind of fuel we can get, which is natural North Sea gas. In the future, we can use biomethane, we could use hydrogen. We're in a perfect position to utilise any of those green carbon neutral fuel sources in the future.
Kwanele, tell me how this affected your production operations and making things work on a day-to-day basis.
Well, it took quite a bit to get used to operating the directly fired wash still, but with the training and support that we got from the contractors that did the installation over the last maybe 4, 5, 6 weeks, the operators were fully trained before they're sort of like unleashed to run by themselves. And over the last 5, 6 weeks, we've sort of like maybe hit our stride, and we are now up to the full number of mashes that we planned to do once the upgrade was finished. So we're now up to 18 mashes per week, which is almost double what we used to make when I joined the organization in 2019. And as Alistair says, we've installed the directly fired still, but there's the technology that goes with it, the heat recovery systems that have been put in to try and optimize the excess heat that comes from your flue gas. We've also, as an operations team, been getting used to that and trying to optimize how best we can use the hot water that's generated from the directly fired still. So it's been a very steep learning curve for everyone on site, I would say, to get to where we are now. And I think there's still more learning to go before we can say we are maybe the finished article, I would say.
I know that anybody that's taken a distillery tour has heard how you use the water that's generated through the boiler and the steam and the hot water in multiple washes during the mashing process in cooking the grains. But this provides even more hot water for you to use in that process, right?
Yes. So the way that the system is set up is such that the flue gas that's coming off the burner for your directly fired still is used to heat up water that sits in a heat recovery tank out at the back of the site behind the malt barns. And what we're then doing is we're utilizing that hot water in a sort of like a closed loop system to preheat the wash, to preheat the low wines and faints, as well as pretty much to take care of any heating needs that we've got in the mash house. So as you rightly point out, traditionally to heat up your waters in the mash house, we would have used steam, we would have used pans and coils in tanks to do that. But with this new system that's been installed, we can rely on the hot water that's been generated. So that drastically reduces the amount of work that the boiler that we still have on site is doing. And the way that the site has also been configured is such that the wash still condenser, prior to this upgrade, we used to run both condensers cold, as it were. We just simply flooded them with cold water as much as we possibly could to get the condensation to happen relatively further up the condenser. But the wash still configuration has been changed in such a way that we're actually running the wash still hotter. It's also producing hot water as well. And it's utilizing water from the heat recovery tank that I'm talking about. So the tank, in a traditional setup, what would have happened is that there would have been two tanks set up, a hot well system and a warm well system. What we have is sort of like a hybrid tank. It's a giant 100,000 liter tank that holds, as it says, 100,000 liters, but there's temperature layering in the tank. So the top of the tank is sitting at about between 80, 85 degrees to about 92 degrees. And as you go down the levels of the tank, the bottom of the tank, when we're in full operation, probably sits at around the high 50s and the low 60s. And the way that the site is running at the moment is we're getting that relatively warm water at 50 odd degrees coming out of that tank, going through a heat exchanger and being supplied at 50 degrees to the wash still condenser, which in turn generates more hot water as it comes off at the top of the still. So it's coming off between 75 to about 85 when it's fully running. As a result of that, the distillate coming off the wash still condenser still needs to be cooled further before it can go into the safe. So as a result, sub-coolers were installed to take the temperature down, where you have, again, more cold water circulating to bring your temperature down, as it were.
And you mentioned that you're using some of this hot water to preheat the low wines before they go into the spirit still, right?
Yep, absolutely.
And that reduces the energy usage. By putting it in there warmer, you don't have to use as much energy to get it up to boiling, right?
Exactly. It's night and day because prior to this upgrade, we didn't have the ability to preheat the loins and faints. And as a result, we were charging the spirit still at sort of like ambient temperature. And the boil-up time during those days of operation used to take about 55 minutes to an hour. But now with this hot water available, we can preheat the loins and faints to about 75, 80 degrees. And it takes 10, 15 minutes for the spirit to start coming in. So we've actually reduced the boil-up time by a good 30, 35 minutes. And again, as you say, that's a huge energy saving, less carbon being burnt by the boiler to give us the energy we need to boil it up.
I'll address this question to both of you because I think this is the obvious question that our listeners are asking. Did this affect the taste of the spirit in any way?
I think from the organoleptics that we've nosed on site, it seems to be a much more intense flavor. When you nose the new make spirit as it comes off during the distillation, you're seemingly getting much more intense flavors, which is not a surprise given the sort of like the temperature differences that you have between this directly fired still and what we had before. I think before we had copper pans and steam pans and coils operating at around maybe between 2.5 bar to 3 bar. And with steam at that pressure, you're probably looking at temperature range of between 133 degrees Celsius to 144 degrees Celsius. When the wash still is in full operation now, we're getting furnace temperatures of close to 1,000 degrees. And when you think about the sort of like the chemical reactions that are taking place within the wash still, and you go back to your sort of like your high school chemistry days where they say for every 10 degree rise in temperature, you get a doubling of the reaction rate. So when you talk about the browning reactions that are sort of like what we are after with the directly fired still, we are sort of like several orders of magnitude well beyond that sort of like doubling of your reaction rate. So there's a lot of mild reactions happening because of the huge temperature differences that we see. And I think on the back of that, there's a much more intense flavor.
I'm glad you answered that.
From that. I don't know what Alistair's impression.
No, I mean, and yeah, Kwanele's got a complete handle there on some of the chemistry that's going on, some of the organochemistry. The other thing to consider as well, Mark, we didn't just spend money on a new direct-fired wash still. There was substantial investment across the distillery. So there's additional fermentation capacity. So we're now fermenting all our mashes to a minimum 70 hours, 72 hours. So we're getting much longer fermentation time, which has given us, creation of a much kind of fruitier wash going into the still. We're also currently going to be installing kind of liquid yeast. As you know, the next stage is maltings. This is part of a bigger picture that we're trying to do, which is really to try and introduce as much depth and richness of flavour into the new make as we can. The distillery had that. It had probably a little bit more of it in the olden days, but it still had that. All we're doing is really trying to enhance that and bring it back up to as rich as possible a new make as we can using the technologies nowadays.
Now, this will be sort of, if I read this correctly, the third generation of Glen Garioch Spirit in the last 20, 30 years, because I remember in the 90s, mid-90s or so, Glen Garioch switched away from using peat. And the flavors changed and the whiskies changed 10, 12, 15 years later when they came out. Now you're changing things around again. I know we won't see the results of this for another 10 to 12 years at least, but in, say, the mid-2030s, are we going to see a new Glen Garioch, essentially, with the spirit from this more intense flavor, the additional fermentation time? Are we going to see a different Glen Garioch in a decade?
I think you'll see a slightly different Glen Garioch to what you're seeing at the moment, but hopefully it's taking it back to where it was. So it's not so much a new Glen Garioch, it's a return old ways. So yes, it will be different to what we're having currently, but hopefully you'll see a similarity in character to what you're perhaps going to be tasting and nosing in 15, 20 years' time as to what you were perhaps nosing, a decade ago from the 1980s, 1990s.
So tell me about the new floor maltings, because I think this is the first floor maltings to be put into a distillery, an existing distillery, in a long time, and I think it's the first floor maltings in Scotland since Kilchoman.
Yeah, there's a few people talking about maltings, but I'm looking at the window here, and I'm looking at the kind of southern end of what is probably the most impressive aspect of the distillery, which was its traditional floor maltings. And that's one of the reasons why we enticed Kwanele to come and join us, because Kwanele is not just a very experienced distillery manager and with great technical ability and detail, but he also has good working knowledge of maltings from his previous roles within the industry. So this was always very much on the cards as part of his tenure as manager, is to reintroduce this, but we're all tremendously excited. Kwanele, what's your view on reintroducing floor maltings?
Yeah, I think it would be nice to see the contrast. As Alistair alludes, I've worked in commercial maltings where you're talking of batch sizes of 300 odd tons. I worked in one maltings where we were steeping 300 tons of barley per day type thing. The contrast between coming from that and what we are proposing to do here, where you're steeping 28 tons a week, and seeing what comes out of on the back of that process would be a learning curve for me as well, because with your commercial floor maltings, you've got all the, I suppose, for the lack of a better word, the gubbins that go with it, the control and everything else. Whereas here you're relying on the knowledge and the skill of the person that's doing the malting, the maltman, as it were. He's sort of like your gubbins, as it were. So it would be interesting to see what it is that we can get out of that process, and what that will do to the flavor that we're expecting to get from the spirit made with the floor maltings.
We've got an idea of the impact that'll do, because as a business we already have 2 distilleries out of the 5 operating with floor maltings, Beaumont and Lafroig. So we're pretty confident in what we know what's going to come out, but it's going to be exciting to have that here on the mainland, here at Glen Garioch. It just adds another great, fantastic aspect to the story of this distillery, which is already well over 200 years old, that we're bringing back another traditional process, which is the skill. It's a manual skill.
And it is a skill that has been lost over the years within most of the distilleries. How do you train up a new, using the gendered term maltman, but a malt person in this case, how do you train up somebody new to do this who's never done it before? Do you have to bring somebody from Isla over to show your staff how to do all this and turn the malt and everything, and to teach them how to do it?
Well, we're hoping to do it the other way around. If COVID is lifted, the restrictions are continue to lift, and hopefully they do for the good of us all. And we're hoping to put some of the guys over to learn there, but we still have experience within the current distillery team of when the floor maltings were last operated here. Kenny Grant, who some of your listeners are probably hopefully experienced it at some point if they've been to the distillery. Digger, as he's known, he's himself used to work here when the floor maltings. We do have malting knowledge, as I said. Kwanele has commercial malting knowledge, but we have these 2 wonderful sites in Isla, and we're hoping to send the team over to learn on the job from the local teams there at Lafroig and Beaumont.
You're going to have new tools fabricated so the guys can turn the malt by hand, or are you going to use a mechanical turner?
Oh, God, no. Well, listen, when you're spending millions of pounds like we are, we have to save money, so we'll dig out the old ones. They should be somewhere in a cupboard.
Kwanele, what does this mean to you to have floor maltings back in operation?
It's an exciting time. I think it would be a huge challenge as well, as you allude to, getting all the maltmen, in inverted commas, trained up to turn out a product that we can use in the process. It's an exciting time, and I'm looking forward to seeing the contrast between what you get out of a floor maltings and what you'd expect to get from your commercial maltings type thing, as well as seeing how that goes through the process of your mashing and your fermentation and your stilling. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that, I'd say.
Will this replace all of the commercial malt that you need, or will this only handle part of it?
It's probably going to be, decision hasn't been made yet, but it's probably most likely going to be part of the mashing bill. It's not going to replace all of the malt that we use. It's most likely to be part of your mashing bill. But I'm sure it will be enough to have an impact on the new make spirit that we make and ultimately the whiskey that's going to mature for the 10, 15 years.
Obviously, there has to be an energy source to dry the grain. What are you going to use that's relatively carbon neutral and fits within the sustainability initiative?
Well, this heat recovery tank that I was referring to, I think we're generating so much water from the flue gases that a significant proportion of the heating requirements will come from this heat recovery system that we have, augmented by the steam boiler that we have on site. So in a nutshell, the heat source for drying the malt will again be this heat recovery system that we have.
I have to say, Mark, for Sipes, who are our partners on the refurbishment of the distillery, this has always been designed. The new still house was always designed with the floor maltings in mind. So the two of them are going to be complementary, and the heat will primarily be drawn off of the furnace from the still house. So it's been built with that in mind, the maltings in mind when we did the still house.
So you won't be using peat at all then?
Well, we can't tell you everything, so that's one to wait and see.
I think it is kind of ironic that you're actually using water to dry the grain.
Well, it's a heat.
I know I'm being facetious here, Alistair.
I know.
I'm kidding, Alistair.
Yes, I know.
It sounds like you guys are having a lot of fun with this. Is this kind of a dream to be able to take the distillery back to something approximating what it was back in the day?
It's certainly an interesting proposition in our industry to be moving in this direction. It seems counterintuitive to do it, especially with the kind of sustainability journey. But in actual fact, it's complementary. So it's the best of both worlds. We're getting to go in a direction following a trail of quality, which is actually going to be complementary to our vision, which we just announced, which I'm sure you're aware of, the proof positive at Beam Suntory, and it's going to contribute to our greenhouse gas emission targets and our water stewardship targets. So, yeah, it's wonderfully exciting to be able to do this, to be able to go back to traditional methods, increase headcount, and not be driven purely by cost and automation. For me, it's exciting, and I'm quite long in the tooth now. I guess Kwanele must be quite exciting to be a distillery manager of this site, eh?
It is. I think, as you say, we are bringing back the traditional methods, but at the same time, it's not simply just a question of turning the clock back and doing things the way that they were done maybe 20, 30, 40 years back. Well, what's exciting for me is where you're bringing these traditional methods back, but you also have the science that comes with it. And it's how you can marry the two and get them to sort of like coexist and live peacefully next to each other to produce a great spirit at the end of the day. So, yeah, it's a very exciting time, I'll say.
And that works with your background, Kwanele, in that before you joined Glen Garioch, you were at that really big new high-tech distillery that a really big whiskey company built that uses all sorts of technology to produce all sorts of different flavors, and now you're going back to basics, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. I think that's the charm that Glen Garioch has, that when you contrast that great big distillery that you refer to and what you have at Glen Garioch, it's like you've got craftsmen making your spirit. It's and the fact that you're bringing in your directly fired still and you're bringing in the floor maltings sort of like completes the picture, and it makes that contrast even more pronounced, I would say. Yeah.
Kwanele Mdluli managed Diageo's Glen Elgin Distillery for several years and also worked at Rose Isle Distillery, along with the Rose Isle and Burghead Maltings, before joining Beam Suntory 2 years ago. Longtime WhiskyCast listeners may remember Alistair Longwell from his days managing Beam Suntory's Ardmore Distillery. Ardmore has one of the 17 green energy test projects being funded by the British government's Green Distilleries competition. That project is testing the feasibility of producing hydrogen from the distillery's wastewater, then using the stored hydrogen to fuel the distillery's energy needs. The initial tests were successful, and the project is in the running for a second round of funding that would allow the system to be scaled up over the next 3 years. The next round of grants will be announced in June. We'll keep you posted. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Oban. Every sip of Oban is like a postcard. Oban's single malt Scotch whisky is offering the chance to immerse yourself in Oban and the whiskey-making process through the Oban Abode experience. 2 winners will receive a trip to Scotland to stay in the Oban Abode, just steps from the distillery. To learn more and enter, visit obanabode.obanwhiskey.com. Complete rules are available at the website. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. With travel retail slowly starting to open up again following the pandemic, let's start off with a look at Jim Beam's Lineage Travel Retail exclusive. It's a 15-year-old bourbon that is the first Jim Beam bottling to carry Freddie No's name alongside his father Fred's, and it's bottled at 55.5% ABV. The nose has a good balance of spices, oak, toasted vanilla, caramel candy, and a hint of old leather. The taste is warm and welcoming, gentle at first with caramel and vanilla notes. Then a burst of spices comes alive, along with touches of baked apples and oak. Adding a few drops of water brings out a nice touch of chocolate. The finish is long and well-balanced with lingering spices. I'm scoring the Jim Beam Lineage Bourbon a 94. I mentioned Milam & Green's Castle Hill Series Batch 1 during the news. Once again, it's a blending of 20 barrels of 13-year-old Tennessee bourbon bottled at 54.25% ABV. The nose has notes of cherry cobbler, vanilla, tobacco, brown sugar, subtle spices, and a hint of almond oil. The taste is fruity and intense with a nice oily mouthfeel. Chili powder and black pepper spices are complemented nicely by cherry cobbler, tropical fruits, dark chocolate, and a hint of almonds. Adding some water opens up fruity notes of peaches and apricots. The finish is long, well-balanced, and complex, with subtle spices, a nice fruitiness, and oak tannins. I'm scoring the Milam & Green Castle Hill Series Batch 1 a 93. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit, the award-winning rye whiskey distillery based in Baltimore, Maryland. Try their signature cask and double oak rye whiskies, each one a proprietary blend of high and low rye mash bills. Sagamore Spirit has mastered the transformational art of blending. Learn more at sagamorespirit.com. Please drink responsibly. Now, let's look at another one of the whiskeys we heard about during the news, the Heaven's Door Redbreast Master Blenders Edition. It's bottled at 50% ABV. The nose has notes of apple pie, honey, pipe tobacco, black cherries, and cocoa beans. The taste is robust and well-balanced with a nice spiciness and notes of apple pie, dark chocolate, honey, black cherries, and a touch of nuttiness. The finish, long and well-balanced. I'm scoring the Heaven's Door Redbreast Master Blenders Edition a 94. Billy Layton has been very busy these days, not only with that collaboration, but with the new Redbreast Dream Cask Oloroso Sherry Edition that I mentioned last time around. I received a sample of this 29-year-old single pot still Irish whiskey the other day. It's bottled at 51.2% ABV. The nose is fruity and sweet with subtle spices and touches of peaches, red apples, apricots, ginger, and a hint of honey in the background. The taste is nectar thick and luscious with a great balance. Fruity notes dominate at the start, followed by a subtle burst of baking spices and touches of honey and brown sugar. The finish is long and complex with an excellent balance. The original Redbreast Dream Cask from 2018 is one of the few whiskeys I've ever given 98 points to. I'm scoring the 2021 edition of the Redbreast Dream Cask a 95. Let's finish up with Lagavulin's new Offerman edition, 11-year-old Isla single malt finished in casks from the Guinness Open Gate Brewery in Baltimore. This one is bottled at 46% ABV. The nose reminds me of an Isla campfire with wonderful peatiness, heather, freshly roasted coffee beans, honey, and a hint of baking chocolate. The taste starts off creamy and sweet with notes of caramel and honey, followed by a gentle burst of peat smoke and spices that don't overwhelm the sweetness. Hints of coffee beans, dark chocolate, and heather linger nicely in the background. The peaty character takes over on the finish as the sweeter notes start to fade for a classic Lagavulin finish. I'm scoring the Lagavulin Offerman Edition Guinness Cask Finish a 95. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these whiskeys to our searchable list of more than 3,100 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
The story of Dewar's Portuguese Smooth is also the story of Stephanie McLeod, winner of the Master Blender of the Year award for the past 2 years and the first woman to win the award, period. Stephanie dreamed up the curious idea of finishing 8-year-old Dewar's Scotch in port barrels, and when Stephanie has an idea, it's usually a good one. The result is like nothing else you've ever tasted, with hints of apricots and honeydew melon, red cherries, and rich vanilla. It's a celebration of Portugal and Scotland, and life in general. So grab a bottle and start writing some stories of your own.
Let's open up the inbox now for your voice. This time we're actually going to hear a couple of other voices, Leon and Patty from the Malt Mariners in Germany. Just to explain, a couple of months ago, Leon emailed me. He was planning a surprise for Patty's 40th birthday party and asked if I would record a video birthday greeting for Patty. Of course, I'm not about to say no to that. And I sent over one of our WhiskyCast Glencairns for Patty, along with one for Leon. Well, international shipping being what it is these days, the glasses finally arrived the other day, just in time for their latest Malt Mariners YouTube tasting. And here's how the guys started it off.
Welcome to WhiskyCast, Cask Strength Conversations. I am Leon.
And I am Patty. So, guys, hang on a second here. We're talking in English right now because we want to say a big thank you to, what can I say? I'm a little bit starstruck because Mark Gillespie from this podcast, WhiskyCast, he sent us 2 glasses, 2 Glencairn glasses, officially Glencairn glasses, from his podcast. I'm listening to your podcast years, Mark. So I'm really a big fan. I'm listening to every single podcast, and I think I listened back into 2005 or something like that. I think I listened to every episode. So I was very, very happy that you congratulated me to my 40th birthday. I was really surprised, and it was a really, really nice gesture. This is what whiskey is all about. What can I say? And thanks to Leon who organized that. And I'm really amazed of it. But we would like to say thank you. You're one of the reasons why I am in this business right now, because it was a decision that I've made. I've listened to your podcasts and I was like, okay, I need to do something in this business. And now I'm working in whiskey and doing whiskey. And together with Leon, we're the Malt Mariners and bringing whiskeys to people at home. And trying to celebrate life through this nice liquor. I don't know what can I say. Thank you very much. With everything that I have, I hope that you will stay safe and continue your work. It is great to listen to you, and keep on the good work.
And before you say cheers, Paddy, I have to say I think it's really, really, really cute. I've never seen Paddy as speechless as this, never. After he saw this video, and I've never seen Paddy being that nervous speaking into our camera like this time. It's actually the same for me, but I can really see that you're happy and nervous, which is a really good combination. So I leave the mic to you, Paddy, for saying cheers to Mark.
Yeah. Cheers, Mark. This is to you and your health and to everything, and good luck, and stay safe. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate the kind words, and I'm glad that I could be a small part of your birthday, Paddy. There is a link to the Malt Mariners YouTube channel in the show notes for this week's episode at whiskycast.com. If there's something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and other things that make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. Did you remember to wish your friends a happy International Tennessee Whiskey Day on Friday? Okay, if you forgot it, you have a legitimate excuse this year. That's because this is the first time International Tennessee Whiskey Day has been celebrated. Tennessee's General Assembly issued a proclamation earlier this month declaring May 21st as International Tennessee Whiskey Day. It marks the anniversary of the day their predecessors ended Prohibition in Tennessee back in 1937. Chris Fletcher of Jack Daniels was one of those raising a glass to celebrate.
You know, it took us over a year basically in Lynchburg to get the distillery built back here and making whiskey again. But May 21st, 1937 is certainly a pivotal day, not only for Jack Daniels, but the state of Tennessee. And obviously, it speaks to how Tennessee whiskey is really, standing on its own and it's become its own unique type of American whiskey. And, as Tennesseans, we're very proud of it. And so we're happy to share it with the world.
And I think folks don't realize that Tennessee was one of the last states to end Prohibition. Everybody seems to think, well, yeah, it was 1933, but in reality, you guys had to wait 4 more years, right?
We did. Yes, we did. And, and even, a lot of distilleries had medicinal licenses, which, enabled them to continue production during Prohibition. Especially up, in the Kentucky area, there were several, a handful anyway. And we didn't have that at Jack Daniels or any of those advantages really. So if you think about it, by the time, we came back in 1938, other distilleries that had been started in 1933 or even through Prohibition, they had fully aged whiskey ready to sell. And of course we started back and, the Mdlulis at the time, we actually did some 1-year-old whiskey that we sold for a while. Also, the distillery made brandy. We made some apple brandy, some pear brandy and things. So it's, you think about that time and, what a risk the Mdluli family, was taking in investing and resurrecting the distillery that their uncle had done decades before.
By the way, Tennessee was also one of the first states to adopt Prohibition. A full 10 years before the 18th Amendment to the Constitution made Prohibition nationwide. However, Tennessee was not the last state to end it. In 1966, Mississippi was the last state to make alcohol legal, though to this day, many states still have so-called dry counties and towns where alcohol sales are not allowed. Technically, I still live in one, though that is gradually changing. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot. The tears of Ireland's great writers bursting with flavour, humour and angst. Bottled for you to taste. No writers were harmed in the making of this premium Irish whiskey. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, cocktail recipes, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of all of our past episodes dating back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
People never forget the person who introduced them to Redbreast. And then those people go on to introduce others to Redbreast, and soon the flock has grown exponentially. It's like a pyramid scheme. Without any of the bad stuff, of course.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
Obrigado. That's Portuguese for thank you. All right, so I'm not exactly fluent, but I've learned a thing or two telling the story of Dewar's Portuguese Smooth. It's finished in pork barrels for a smooth, rich taste you won't find in any other whiskey. I may not be able to tell you where to find the best pastéis de nata in Lisbon, but I know how to say thank you. So obrigado, and cheers to staying curious.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2021, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening, and please stay safe.